to be back with you. My voice is a little froggy tonight. I hope you don't mind. I'm having some issues with my sinuses, and I haven't felt well this week, so if I looked a little tired and draggy, that's why. Also, old. I'm old as dirt. Now, tonight we're going to discuss ghosts. After the last episode that talked about the ghosts that walked through the wall here, the man who lived here who was the tailor, I got notes from two different people who said, oh, you know, if that would have been me, I would have moved out straight away. I would never have wanted to be around ghosts. Here's the thing. Your experience with ghosts is often determined by your own reactions. If you're fine just being a passive observer, yes, you're going to be startled. It would be silly to think that you wouldn't be startled. But yes, if you're a calm person and you can just, or you just train yourself to be a calm person and accept that it's occupying the same space that you are, it's just in another time period. That's a better way to look at it. And you won't find that there's aggression or anger or all the nonsense that you see. And it really is nonsense that you see on most of the, okay, we're going to do an ooky spooky television show about ghostly hauntings, you know. And they really ramp it up to make people frightened. And I think that's completely unnecessary. I have personally never had an experience like that. Never. Ever. I can state that with a certainty. So I wish the same thing for you. Now, we're going to talk about playful ghosts. And sometimes they just want to be paid attention to. In the one that I told you about, London, the man that was walking down the hall next to me, you know, sort of muscling me over one side and the other, he was just being playful. He wanted me to pay attention to the fact that he was there. That is quite often the motivation for a ghost to interact with a human being, if they know you're there, not if they're just walking through the walls like the tailor was. If they know you're there and they want to interact, quite often they just want, oh, somebody pay attention, I'm still here. So, all right. The first one. Years ago, I was doing a degree in London, and I was boarding, so to speak, with an older couple who lived right outside of London in the Kent countryside. And at that point, they were both in their 80s, the couple. And they were so glad to have company and you know, have someone to cook for and sit with in the evening and talk to. I went down to breakfast one day, and the woman whose home I was living in, she looked at me, and I must have had rings under my eyes. And she said, are you not sleeping well in that bed? Do you need us to turn the mattress or do something else? Do you have enough covers? Is something wrong? And I said to her, I'm going to say a really weird thing. Have you ever had anyone who stayed with you feel like there was someone in the room at night and moving things around and maybe even like touching them when they were sleeping? And she says, oh, that's just the ghost. And I said, okay, well, good. At least I'm not startling you and making you think I'm a crazy woman. Could you tell me about this? And she explained that where they lived had been heavily bombed during World War II. And there were a lot of bombed out houses that were practically immediately rebuilt because there was a housing shortage. And she and her husband had bought one of those houses that had been rebuilt. The person who was waking me up at night was the man who died when the house was bombed. And he wasn't trying to be mean-spirited or anything. And she said, oh, just tell him to bugger off. And I said, I don't think that's my approach, but we'll see how it goes. So that next night, the same thing happened. Here's what had been happening night after night after night. I would just get to sleep soundly, really in that wonderful, deep place. And all of a sudden, at the bottom of the bed, someone would flip the covers off my feet and uncover my feet so they were exposed to the cold. And I thought, well, this isn't on. So he was doing this again, night after night. And I finally just sat up, put the pillows behind my back, and said, I know you're here. I know you're here. I acknowledge your presence, but I really have a very busy week and I need to get some sleep. You're keeping me from being asleep. Could you please help me out and leave me alone and let me sleep peacefully? Now, he didn't cover my feet back up, but he left and he never came back the entire time I was there. So when I went down to breakfast the next day, she said, so what's happened now? And I told her what I'd said. The next night, I could sense that he was there. I said, what did I say? I said, I really just need you to leave me alone so I can sleep. Now, the bedroom walls in this 1930s built house were very thin. And I heard her on the other side of the wall in the next bedroom. And she went, oh, jolly good, dear. You told him off. He never came back. He never bothered me again. So, story number 1. Story number 2, we're going back to when I was about 5 years old. And we lived in a great big colonial house with big columns in the front. And the housekeeper said to me, why do you keep moving the tomatoes? Except what she said was tomatoes. I said, I'm not moving anything. Out on the glassed-in porch that was off the back, it was like a little conservatory, my mother would go out and pick the green tomatoes. I'm going to use the American pronunciation. She'd pick the green tomatoes when they were not quite ripe yet, and we kept having cold snaps, so this must have been in the spring. And she would line them up on the windowsill, so the sun that was coming in, it was a wonderful room. It was so pleasant and happy. And they would ripen. She would get the tomatoes to ripen up. And I would go in the other room and go do something, or go in my playroom, come back, and they were in a completely different place, because one whole side like this was a glass wall. One side right in front of me was a glass wall with a glass door that went out to the patio outside. If she had put them over here in this window, I would go back and they'd be over here in this window. So the housekeeper said to me again, why are you moving those around? And I said, I'm not moving those around. Really, I'm not. And she goes, oh, why are you always telling lies about things like that? Nobody else is here but you. You're the only one who went out there and sat with a book, so you moved them. No, I hadn't moved them. We had an ironing lady who used to come once a week, and she would do all the ironing for the household. That's back in the day when, men wore ironed starched shirts, and she ironed the dresses for our little school. She ironed my father's shirts and all that. And she saw my face as I was about to turn and go down the hall, and she said, I know you didn't move them. And I said, good, did you see who did? She goes, no, but I know it's not you who's moving them. And she left it at that. That particular house, and it was like a small farm too, I would see people all the time, but they were dressed in clothing from another time. There was no acknowledgement from them. There wasn't any, oh, hello, we see a little girl up in the glass porch. There was none of that. They were just living in their time period in the 1800s, and I was seeing them. But somebody who had lived in that house was having a playful moment, and they were moving the tomatoes, along the windowsill. So that's one. Okay, no, actually, that's number 2. The next one is Charles in Chattanooga. Again, 1930s kind of era. We bought a ranch house that had been built in the 1930s, and the man who built it, his name was Charles, and he was, at that point, there was such a shortage of materials because the Americas were about to go into the war, and they had just come out of the Depression, or they were still in the Depression. And we bought the house knowing that it needed a complete top-to-bottom renovation, but that it was going to be wonderful when we were done. We moved in there. We gutted the house. And Mark started with the back bedroom, which was going to be the master bedroom. He insulated it, put up new plasterboard, made sure it was all safe, the electrics were fine and everything. And we sort of camped out in that room as he built the rest of the house all the way through. Every time I would go in the bathroom to either use the toilet or to brush my teeth, I would be brushing my teeth and I would raise my head and there was a man looking at me. And his face would go like that, so he saw me too. All right. He didn't intimidate me. He didn't frighten me. We knew what his name was because it had been on the settlement papers because the house had been owned by one family since the 1930s. And I said, Charles, you've got to stop that. You know, and so for a few days it would stop. But then when I got to the point where we had enough of the house built and I could start hanging big decorative mirrors up on the wall and things like that, you'd hang a mirror up and you'd see his face in there looking at you like. And so Mark and I had a conversation one night, and we had a girlfriend who had come to visit from Pennsylvania, and she was one of my friends from graduate school. And she said, don't you feel nervous about that? And I said, no. I said, he doesn't mean anyone any harm. I said, stop and think about it. He built this house the way he wanted it, and all of a sudden, here were these strangers in his house moving things around, tearing down walls, moving where the doors are. I said, he doesn't mean anyone any harm, but he's making sure we know that he's here. So at one point, I finally had to say, Charles, you need to stop popping up in the mirrors. You're making us all nervous, so please stop doing that. We're fine. You're fine. The house is fine. We love the house. We're not trying to harm this house. We're trying to make it better. So we do love what you did. Now we're just making it a little better for a new time period. And he never came back after that. We never saw him after that. All right. Now let's move to, we're going back to London. All right. One of the things I forgot to tell you in the London episode was that some of the young women who had been sitting with us at breakfast had heard me talking and wanted to talk more. And they would come up, and I mean, seriously, I was in a really small room. They would gather and sit at the edge of the bed, grab chairs and sit inside. And we would talk at night, and we would all go. Because you could hear talking in the room outside like, okay, what, a lineup of people come to the door to, try and participate when we didn't have any more room? And I said, open that door. And one girl got up and opened it. And there was not a soul out there. We had all heard it. Every one of us had heard it. There was like a low muttering, a little bit of a giggle and then low muttering. There was a room across the hall from me. And one morning at breakfast, one of the women said, could you please stop having parties in your room at night? And I said, I'm not having parties in my room. She said, I can hear all those people in the hall. I said, yes, but they're not there. Not in this time period. I said, they're coming to see what we're discussing. And she said, oh, you're just so creepy. So the next time we heard it, there was 2 or 3 of us sitting on the bed and we were all talking. I just went to the door, and again, as soon as you look straight on, you can't see it most of the time. You can't see whatever ghost it is. And I said, you're making everyone very upset. Could you please not do that? I said, that woman who lives in that room, she doesn't want to hear this. Those people who live down there, they don't want to hear this. I'm glad you all have each other for conversation, but please stop gathering in the hall. That's not a good idea. All right. The final 2 ones that we'll talk about are from here in this house. And several of these episodes have happened just within the last week or few weeks. I have a notepad, very much like this, that I keep upstairs. Okay, well, I picked up the wrong notepad. This is not the one with all my notes about what to discuss. So much for that idea. I keep a notepad up there by my side of the bed so that if I wake up in the middle of the night and I remember something that I need to, write down for an article or research or whatever. If I don't use that notepad very often, every once in a while, I'll walk in the room, turn on the light, turn around and look, and the notepads are moved. And they're up on the top of the nightstand with 2 pens sitting there like, okay, come on, get back to it. Make notes. tell people what we want to talk about. That's one thing. The other day, I had some forms that needed to be printed out, and I was in my office, and there's a larger iMac computer in there. And I was sitting, and I thought, okay. And I just quietly said, I see what you're doing. I had found a bunch, when I continue to unpack boxes that have not been unpacked since we moved here 4.5 years ago. And I had found a bunch of Chanel perfume bottles and things like that. And I had placed them down on the end of this really long desk I have up there. And I was looking at the screen, I had the mouse, I'm doing my work, and I'm watching the champagne, the perfume bottles, and they're just quietly sliding to the side, further over against the wall, towards the books in the bookshelf. And I looked out of the side of my eye. I could not see a single thing. I could not see a single person. But the perfume bottles had moved along the surface. So it wasn't my imagination. It really did happen. There's something to remember about watching things move. Usually, they don't move very far. It's not like somebody picks up a book in one room, a ghostly presence, and carries it to the other end of the house and places it someplace else. This is a personal experience, but every time I've ever seen things move, and you know, it's very clear when they do. Sometimes you can even hear the scraping, whatever, or the rustling. They move it within a very short distance of where it originally was. So this is nothing to be worried about. If you see ghosts, if you sense ghosts, if you see things moving in your house, sometimes just being playful and saying, yes, hi. Okay, I see you've moved all my pens. Okay, I see you've moved all the perfume bottles. Just acknowledge it. And then if you're playful with them when they're being playful with you, why not give it a try? Works out better that way sometimes. Okay, in an upcoming episode, speaking of episodes, we are going to try, or I am going to try, to have at least one of these a week. And I'm going to aim for Sundays as the release date, all right? So that way you'll know what time to look for this. If you're lucky, you might get a bonus episode in the middle, but that's not a promise. And as to when the episode will show up on Sunday, that's not a promise either. It depends on how I'm feeling. It really does. And how taxing my week has been, because editing takes it out of me. It really does. All right. We'll leave it at that. Now, please, like, subscribe, leave comments, put the little bell on for notifications. We have only a handful of people who followed us over from the original. Seriously, I think right now we have 15 subscribers. We need more. This is not going to be sustainable to do in the long term if we don't have people who follow us. There's another thing you can do to help us grow the channel. You can, at the bottom, underneath each episode, you'll see there's a little arrow that goes like that. You can forward this if you think any of your friends might be interested. If you have open-minded family, if you have open-minded friends, forward it to them and tell them the same thing. If you really thought this was groovy, forward it. If we grow by word of mouth, that's a good thing too. Because trust me, I am not going to advertise. And I keep getting little pop-up notices. Would you like to promote this video? No, no. I would like this to be organic. And if it doesn't grow organically, then maybe it's not meant to be. Now, back to upcoming. In an upcoming episode, I'm not sure if it'll be the next one or the one after that, I'm going to discuss why I'm doing this. Why now? Why am I coming out of the closet after all these years again and doing this? So, think of questions. Ask. Put the questions in the comments. I will try and answer them. If I think that they're suitable for the upcoming episode, you may see me make a note when I respond to you that says, ooh, that's a really good one. Let's ask that in the upcoming episode. So I'm not sure. but I try and answer everything. All right. We're going to leave it there for now. Hope everyone's having a good week ahead. Bye.